Hello and welcome to episode 12 of Diary Risk Security Consultant. A little bit different this week in that we have been asked to do a presentation on the ASCONE system. It's come up a good bit in the last couple of weeks, questions on retail arrest. We have a lot of people who probably will have static guarding training, never worked in the retail industry, and now with COVID-19, retail stores being the only places that are hiring, many of them start to move into retail security with little or no additional training for them. So I've been asked to do a special episode specifically on retail security. It would probably end up being a number of episodes. I've put together some slides on it, specifically on the ASCONE method, which you should be able to see on the screen now. And I'm going to talk people through it. For people who have done it before, it'd be second nature to you, but I'll explain some of the background of it, where it's come from, why it's in place, and some of the problems that you'll come across with it as well. As always, if there's any questions on it, there's a get in touch page at the end. You can ask any questions that you want to. I'm going to specifically cover the ASCONE model here. I'll go through some of the alternatives to it, but I'll also speak about where it fits in the overall arrest procedure, because all I'm going to go to is the point where the person is walking out of the door today. If you want to do me to do another presentation on how you actually detain that person, that's absolutely fine. I can do that as well. But for today, all I'm going to cover is the actual lead up to the arrest and the detection phase of the arrest procedure, covering ASCONE. So I suppose, firstly, one of the first things that always springs to mind for me is the old Boy Scout saying, you know, the map is not the territory. ASCONE is a model. It's not prescriptive, and it doesn't make decisions for you. It's a tool. A tool is not a solution. So it gives you steps that you can follow, but it doesn't tell you what you should do, and that's important to know. So the map is not the territory. ASCONE is not on the ground with you. It doesn't, I suppose, replace good, sensible decision-making by security operatives on the ground. It can support that good, sensible decision-making, but it doesn't replace it. I'm going to give you examples in a while of where ASCONE, you might have situations where you have the complete ASCONE model followed and you should not make an arrest, and give you other ones where it is a perfectly good arrest, but ASCONE will not work for those things. So ASCONE is a model, and it's a model specifically designed for dealing with the crime of theft. If you take it outside of the crime of theft, or specifically shoplifting within the crime of theft, if you take it outside of that realm and take it out of context, it no longer works. So like I said, the map is not the territory. On the ground decision making is key. ASCONE as a model just supports that decision making. So that's an important one to differentiate when we're talking about the steps that we're going to try follow. So it's been around for years. I really don't know where it came from. I know I've been involved in around retail security for about 19 years this year. And it's been around as long as I'm around, and a long time before it. I've got some books over there in the bookshelf that go back to the early 80s versions of Wilson and Brooks, the security handbook or security manual, and they reference ASCONE in there. So I go back to probably before I was born, you know, that has been around. But the model and decision-making framework that it forms is just as relevant today as it was probably when it was written. So some of the benefits of using this, things like ASCONE, it is a very handy framework for delivering training. It's very difficult when you're delivering training to retail security staff to explain all the intricacies of why, what, how the law works, or what we might call the niceties of law. ASCONE provides a very bullet-pointed framework that people can follow very, very simply. And if you're delivering training to staff and you've got a limited amount of time and a limited amount of exposure to stress, then it provides a very good decision-making framework, and it can support decision-making under stress. So, you know, look, I've seen my things. I'm trying to remember what the law says and what the law doesn't say. Have I seen this, and this, and there we go. And I suppose the final benefit of it is that it provides a very good reference for reports. And at the end of this presentation, what I will do is I will give an example of how you would reference ASCONE in your incident report following the incident of a theft. And in the notes, I can link to an example incident report for theft that I have on the website. But it does provide a good framework or reference where you can write statements, or if you ask to give a statement to a guard or a police officer when they arrive in, what did you see? I saw them do this, and this. So you've got that framework or checklist that you can go through. What it's designed to do, people watching this maybe from all over the world or jurisdictions outside Ireland, I'm going to base this specifically on how it applies to the law in Ireland. I know the law in the UK is very, very similar, with one small exception. And the law in other common law states, the States, Australia, is possibly very, very similar as well. Where you have civil law states, it might be slightly different, I'm not entirely sure. But the law that covers theft, specifically theft in Ireland, is the Criminal Justice Theft and Fraud Offences Act 2001, specifically Section 4 of that. And Section 4 covers the definition of a theft. Section 5 after that covers exemptions or exceptions to theft. And Section 6 then goes on to talk about fraud or dishonesty or deception. And then you have your other offences against property in there. You've got things like burglary, robbery, and aggravated burglary also contained. But what we're concerned about today is Section 4 and the definition of a theft. And it basically says a person is guilty of theft if he or she dishonestly appropriates property without the consent of its owner and with the intention of depriving its owner of it. So I've highlighted a couple of important words or values or elements that we're going to talk about as we go on within that phrase. So dishonestly, that's an important word. It covers that the person must have a guilty mind. They must know that what they're doing is not honest. And we'll cover what's called the mens rea of a crime in a little while. Appropriates property. So they take control of that property. So they take the control of the property from the owner. They appropriate it without the owner's consent. So the owner either does not know or did not consent to this property being taken control of, and with the intention of depriving the owner of it. So they do not intend to give it back to the owner. So 4 things there. They've done it knowing that it's not honest. They've taken control of the property without the consent of its owner, and they aren't showing an intention to give it back. So that's 4 elements of theft law in Ireland. And ASCONE, the ASCONE model basically is designed to prove these elements. So when we talk about going through the checklist, each one of the checks, the stages in ASCONE, is proving one of these elements here on the screen of the definition of theft. And that's basically what the model does. And we'll show later on how that can cross over and how that model might work. So the elements we're looking for: taking the property of another person without the owner's consent, and you have deprived the owner of control of the property. So the owner has been misappropriated. The control of the property has been taken from one person or place to another person or place. And the final criteria, which comes in under the definitions in that act, is the property must have a value. So that property must have a value to somebody. That property can be real or intangible. It can be financial, it can be monetary, or it can be an intangible value, such as personal property, or somebody takes mortgage deeds or personal photographs, or whatever the case, but it has an intangible value to you. In other words, you can't steal free stuff. If stuff doesn't have a value to anyone, it's been given away or it's been discarded, then it is not theft anymore. So they're the 4 elements, and we're going to look at them, each of them in stages, as we go through the ASCONE model and what it is that we are looking to show within that. Okay. So there are some alternatives. There are many alternatives. I've put up 3 of the common ones here: ASCONE, which is the one we're going to talk about; SCONE; ASCEND. There is also SCOPE, ABSCOND. There are numerous other ones that are out there. So, and what the letters actually mean. So ASCONE, you've got approach, select, conceal, observe, non-payment, and exit. I personally think that's the model that fits what we're looking to do best. SCONE is another commonly used one. You will see that used quite often. Shortened down version is basically just select, conceal, observe, non-payment, and exit. The issue I have with that is that it misses a key component, which is the approach, and that can also always lead to issues. As in, you just see somebody selecting something quickly from a shelf. You haven't seen them walk up. Well, how do you know that they didn't just put it down there? Or, how do you know it's not their own property that they picked up? The other one then that's quite common is ASCEND, which is approach, select, conceal, exit, not paid, and detain. Now, I've got a couple of issues with this. One, Exit should be the final stage. That's the transfer of control is the final stage. And lastly, the detain in there. Now, I've used this end over the years. I've seen it used and it can work quite well. The issue I have with it is the use of the word detain at the end of the process. Because I would always say that just because you see ASCONE, all the elements, does not mean you should or must detain a person. It is the elements of detection of a theft. There are many other criteria that might come into play. For example, it may not be safe to detain. You may not have the manpower, you may not have the resources, you may not have the equipment, you may not have the skill set to detain. And if you're asked as a security employee to enforce this, your employer is basically asking you to detain every person who you witness committing this offence, potentially putting you into a circumstance where you're acting in an unsafe way, going out to stop a person. I'll talk about in a different video or presentation when it comes up. But I always say, I was speaking with a very experienced security trainer during the week, and he had a saying which is quite close to a saying that I've always had. And he said, if I've seen all the elements of a ASCONE, if I'm walking out the door, if I have enough evidence to walk out the door to stop somebody, I have enough evidence to call the police. So detaining somebody is not always the option. If you've got a group of 5, 6 people walking out the door with goods and you're on your own, then the last thing on your mind should be going out and detaining those people. You've got your ASCONE, you've got your evidence, you've got all the evidence that you would have to detain them. You can very easily pass to the police with minimal risk or damage to you, I suppose. The other thing it can encourage people to get is that detention mindset and not to consider other alternatives to arrest, such as deterrence, such as customer service, such as recovery, such as passing on information to the Gardaí. There are all sorts of other elements or alternatives to arrest that we have to consider. But overall, as regards any of the models, I think kind of ASCONE is the one that fits. Overall, it's the best. It's not perfect, but it's the best of the available models at the minute. There are some other ones I mentioned: scope, select, conceal, observe, payment missed, and exit, and abscond, which is approach, browse, select, conceal, observe, non-payment, detained. Again, issues that not everyone browses. Some people just go in, take and go. And there's the detain bit at the end of it, which I'm not entirely, I wouldn't be entirely happy about training to, particularly less experienced staff. You're training less experienced staff and you're telling them as soon as somebody has not paid an exit, you must detain them. I think that's a dangerous route to go down because, like I said, it rules out all sorts of other context. So it's important to understand where ASCONE fits within retail arrest. When it comes to making arrests for shoplifting, and people can call them whatever they want, detentions, arrests, it is an arrest. Once you stop somebody, it's an arrest. ASCONE falls in the very first stage. ASCONE is a model for the detection of a theft. It is not part of arrest. It is you've detected a crime, and what you choose to do afterwards now is up to you. You may choose to contact the Gardaí, and a lot of that will depend on that middle element, which is the preparation. How well resourced, how well equipped, how well manned or staffed are you to make that arrest, and how well skilled or trained are you to make that arrest. So those are all the preparation stages. You can detect the theft, and how you choose to deal with that as an arrest or non-arrest or recovery or an information passing to the police will depend on the middle element. For the purposes of this video, the only one that we're going to talk about is the detection stage. So that's important to phrase beforehand. I'm not going to talk about arresting or detaining shoplifters. I may do that in another video. I think personally it would be better to wait till after this COVID-19 crisis is over, so you could show in an actual video distancing and proxemics and stuff. If it's looking like this is going to stretch out a bit more longer term, then perhaps we can do it in video in this format and then do an add-on then afterwards. So the detection of theft. We've got our stages here, and when you put it up like that, approach, select, conceal, observation, non-payment, and exit, to a person with a limited amount of experience or skill, it can seem quite confusing. When you break it down, I suppose, into everyday language, it becomes much more simplistic. The model works because it makes a word, it makes sense, you know, but it's not the be all and end all. So basically what we're seeking to check off or seeking to observe is the person walk up to the goods, pick up the goods, hide from payment. We maintain 100% visual observation to ensure they don't attempt or pay for the goods, and then they leave the store in possession of the goods. So that's what we're looking for. I want to see the person walk up, pick it up, hide it, maintain possession of it until they leave the store without paying, and then I've got my model. And you put it like that, and essentially the police come to your store, they walk in the door, identifying yourself. Hello, guard, we've just witnessed this person committing a theft. What have you seen? This is exactly what they're looking for the security operative to be able to tell them. If they walk through the door and you say to them, that guy there just took some stuff there, so I've stopped them. That leads to a lot of unanswered questions. But if that guard walks in that door and asks you a question, what has happened here? And you can say to him, well, guard, we've observed this man walk through the door. He's walked into the cosmetic section, selected a bottle of perfume from the shelf, put it inside his bag. He's then walked around the store in possession of it, and we watched him to make sure he had it. He hasn't attempted to pay for it, and then he's left the store in possession of the goods, so we've arrested him and we've returned him to the store. That is case closed. And we also have that in CCTV. But it shows that police officer, that guard, that you're a professional, you know your stuff, you're setting the right tone, and you're answering all the questions, you're cutting off all those loopholes. And we'll talk about that in another case, how defences try to get people out. They look for holes in your story to get a person out, and we'll talk about that in a different video. But that's basically what I'm looking to key off. And what I have, and I'll put up a link to it, it's up on the website as well. I've got a little notebook insert. It's a little laminated card that fits inside my notebook. So, and it has the details that I want to include in a report, an instant report on one side, and on the back then it has the elements of a, I had my notebook to hand, I would get it, the elements of ASCONE written down the back first. So when I'm writing my statement or a report, I'll be in the office, I'll have my basic notebook out, but when it comes to writing my statement, I'll be going, I've got this, yeah, I have this, and I'll be going through the motions from ASCONE on the way out, on the way through my report, and we'll go through that again at the end. So, the detection of a theft, the ASCONE model helps to prove what's called the guilty act. A person has committed an act which breaches the legislation. Go back to the legislation, they've appropriated goods with the intention to deprive without the consent of the owner. They've committed a guilty act. So within the terms of the law, they've breached it, you know. But that's not the only thing that we must show. We must also show that dishonest element. What you'll see on the screen there is a Latin term. And it's been around in law for many, many years, one of the finest principles of criminal law you can come across. It says, actus reus non facit reum nisi mens sit rea. The guilty act is not culpable unless the mind is guilty. So the important term within that is mens rea. Mens rea. Guilty mind. So we have to show that not only did a person commit a guilty act, but they did it with a guilty mind. They knew they were being dishonest. Now, we can't come out and say that person is dishonest. And courts in general don't like you to infer that a person is dishonest. That's what the court's job is, to decide whether the person is guilty or not guilty, or whether they have a guilty mind or not. But we can certainly have things in our report and in our actions and in what we say and do that place the seed in the head of the person who's reading our report or listening to our evidence. So it's important that we know. So you may have elements within this, such as, let's just say, for example, a person is pushing a child around in the buggy. They push the child up to a shelf. The child then inadvertently takes something from the shelf, holds it in their lap. They've approached and selected. They turn around, look at their mother or father. They hide it behind them. The child is 2 or 3. They haven't paid them to go out the door. And that's a guilty act under the law. But we cannot honestly say that they did it with a guilty mind. Or you may have somebody who has special needs and doesn't understand their actions, you know, who might commit it. So not all, that's why I'm saying not all elements will fall in under the guilty act and mind. So you might have all the elements of ASCONE, but you should not make an arrest. And that's why I'm saying it's a model. It does not make decisions for you. Let me give you some examples of where it may not fit. We have a situation where a person walks in, buys an item, is walking around with that item in their hand. They purchased it in your store. They walk up to a shelf or a rack, shelf, let's just say it's more relevant. They leave the item down on that shelf to browse other stuff, walk away from getting it, come back a number of seconds later, turn around, remember it was there, pick it from the shelf, put it back inside their bag, walk out the door. Now you have all the elements of ASCONE. However, you've seen that from the start, or there's just something about the behavior that goes, no, they did that too casually, too openly in front of other people. I'm not making an arrest. So that's what I'm saying. The judgment of the person on the ground, the map is not the territory. You know, you may have other elements where you don't have ASCONE, but it's still a perfectly good theft. Examples might be employee theft. You're observing an employee working on a till. That person is serving a customer. They serve the customer leaves. The employee looks around, opens the till, takes €50 and puts it in their pocket. Close the till and walks away. Now, I have not seen them approach the goods. They were on the till when I saw them. I've seen them select it. I've seen them conceal it. I'm going to observe them. I don't have any non-payment because it's not relevant here. And do I have to wait for the person to exit the store before I approach them about it? No, I don't. Why? Because the principle we're looking for is the transfer of control. That person transferred control of that money from the shop owner to themselves. So I don't have all the elements of ASCONE there, but it's still a perfectly good thing. And that's what I'm saying. You have to add everything up in context. The criminal intent along with the act. So ASCONE covers the guilty act. Other things cover the guilty mind. So it supports your decision making, but it doesn't make the decision for you. You can't just turn around in that circumstance and say, I didn't see him or her exit and there was no non-payment, therefore I can't do anything about this. You know that this is still theft. So to look at some of the elements, if we start off with the approach and what we're looking to see with the approach. So what we're looking for is that we want to see the person walk up to the goods. Now the further away the better. If we have evidence of that person walking in the store with nothing, that's much, much better than just standing up the shelf. But at the least we want to see them walk in with their hands free and nothing in their hands, and then we want to see them select the item. So what the approach with nothing shows that the goods pre-existed on the shelf. They were already on the shelf when this person walked in. So they have an owner. So the goods belong to us. And if there's a price on them, which there is on most things in a store, they have a value to that owner. If they're for sale, they have a value to the owner. So by seeing the approach, they're not their goods, they have an owner, and therefore they have a value to that owner. And that's what the approach is about. So we're looking at what it's without the consent of another is what we're looking for there. The select stage, then, they're going to actually pick it up from the shelf. So what they are doing is they are appropriating the item. They are taking the item into their possession. Right? Now, they have not yet deprived the owner of it. So if you remember, go back to the theft, it says they appropriate an item, take it under their control, and they intend to deprive the owner of it. So now they've appropriated, but they haven't deprived the owner yet. Taken control of it, but they haven't transferred that control yet. Right? So they've taken the control, but yet to transfer the control. Now, in general terms, anybody who wants to purchase something in your shop has to walk up and pick it up. So we don't have any of the elements of the guilty mind section here. We're still showing the start of the guilty act. Where that starts to change slightly now is concealment, because the vast majority of shoppers don't conceal items on their person or in a bag when they're walking around. There are exceptions to that, of course. Food stores now, you're nearly expected to bring your own bags to put things in. But when somebody conceals something, and especially the way in which they conceal it, can show that guilty mind or dishonest area of things. Somebody peels off a security tag and places it inside their inside pocket. That to me is behavior that shows a dishonest intent. It also shows that there's no consent, because we don't give people permission to walk around and put stuff. The owner would not say, look, Mr. Aldi or Mr. Dunn Stores or Mr. Tesco's wouldn't say, I want you to walk around and put my goods in your pockets. We know they wouldn't say that, so it shows that they do not have consent to do that with the item. They haven't broken any laws yet. The item has still not been deprived to the owner, so they still have not transferred control at any point while they're still in that store. They could take that out of their pocket and pay for it. So they haven't transferred control yet. They've taken control, but they haven't transferred that control to themselves yet. Observation then, and this is key, you have to have 100% observation. This is for a couple of reasons. Firstly, continuity of evidence, but mostly to ensure that they remain possession of the items. And it's not returned to another's possession. Now, another could be back to the store's possession if it's just discarded or left somewhere or hidden somewhere, or transferred to another's possession, which is a different issue then altogether. So within the observation stage, you could have some issues. Certain examples could be things like fitting rooms. A person is observed bringing an item into a fitting room and then comes out without that item, and we've lost that observation. So we need to maintain that observation or reinforce that observation with additional checks. Now, most places put in place control measures, such as a person at that fitting room who would take the items from the person, count the items, give them a sticker to say they've got 5 items, and then they come back out, they count the items again and give them back the sticker to say you've returned 5 items. But let's just say you don't have that in place. What you would need to have is you need to have the evidence of the person walking in with the item, preferably CCTV, out without the item, and you would need to have somebody who is in a position to confirm that the item isn't in the fitting room before anybody else enters that fitting room. Now that opens up, you need more security and stuff like that. So it may open up an area where you're saying, okay, look, I've lost observation. I just need to let them go. And that's what I'd advise. If you don't have that resource in place, that's what I would advise to do. If in doubt, let it go. If you lose observation, let it go. Think about the lifelong shoplifters over the years. They're creatures of habit. If they get away with stealing today, they will return tomorrow. Alternatively, you can use deterrence. You feel you have it, you can get your radio, get your uniforms out, people in overt things, talking on the radio to each other, in eyesight of people, not accusing, not approaching, but certainly as a very valuable deterrence measure. Next one we're looking at, non-payment. Again, the guilty mind area. So if they haven't paid, then what that says is that the item still has a value to the owner. So the owner hasn't been given the money for the item. So once the owner is given money, they don't have a value on it anymore because they've received the money first. But as long as they haven't received the money or payment first, it still has a value. And the implication is there, well, I don't consent to not paying for the item. There's an implication that when you're in a shop and prices are up all over the place, the implied terms of our service are that you pay for the goods that are in the shop. So that's where the non-payment is important. The key element is that they have to pay for it, I suppose. And then we finally get to the exit stage. So the suspect, once they exit the store, the word comes back now, deprived. You've now been deprived of it. So control has now been transferred from the store to the suspect. The owner has lost its value, so we're at a loss now. That's important. Control is transferred to the other person without my consent. So that's the elements of the criminal act. Now, if we can say that it was done with a criminal mind, then we add it together, and now we have the ingredients added up then potentially to lead to an arrest. So I won't go into the arrest and things like that afterwards. I will do it if there's an appetite there for it. I will do it in another video. But I want to talk about then, okay, let's just say I have gone arrest this person. Garda walks in, he says, look, I'm going to need a report, I'm going to need a statement, whatever the case might be. It's important that when we're filing our reports, we're able to get what I call our proofs in there. And our primary proofs then are our date, time and place. But then we've got our criminal proofs. We need to be able to get the wording from the legislation or similar into the report. So again, example wording, and I'll pull up an example of an incident report later on. I observed male 1, and I like to, when I'm writing reports, I always give them names. Male 1, female 1, male 1, and male 2. Just it makes it clear and to the point anywhere I'm looking through a detailed report. If I've got 3 males and a female, that I can identify which person I'm talking about. Not the first male, second male, third male, or the guy with the brown hair. It's male 1, description, male 2, description, and then everything under that, I'm talking about that particular person. So we're getting our proofs in here. So an example might be, and again, if you want me to do one on reporting and how you write reporting, that's fine as well. I'd have my proofs on this day, at this time, I was in this place. At the time, I was located in this position, carrying out this duty. So that's my first. Now we're getting into ASCONE. I observed male 1 walk into the area containing alcohol products and approach a shelf. Now at this point, I will have given the description of male 1 beforehand. So I've seen him approach the shelf. I watched male 1 select 3 items of stock from the shelf, and I detailed what those items of stock were if I hadn't seen them at that point. I watched male 1 conceal them inside his bag. If you can get more detail, fantastic. For example, I watched male 1 use his left hand to put 3 bottles of Powers whiskey into his bag. I observed male 1 as he walked around the store for a number of minutes with the item in his bag. I watched male 1 continuously in this time. So I watched him for a number of minutes with the item in his bag, and I didn't lose sight of him, so I know he still has possession. Male 1 did not pay for the items at any point while in the store, so non-payment. Male 1 then left the store via the main exit. So here's all the elements of my criminal act. Now within there, I haven't said he's guilty, that he did it dishonestly, but what I've put a couple of things in there. I used the word conceal, which infers dishonesty. I also said that he walked around the stores in possession of them, and I watched him continuously, and I said that he did not pay for them. So I'm putting those little inferences in there in the time that I watched him, that, you know, I believe he did it with a criminal mind or a guilty mind at the time. So to wrap it up, things to remember: it's a model, not a prescription. It supports decision making. It doesn't make decisions for you. Just because you have them all doesn't mean it's a good arrest. Just because you don't doesn't mean it's not. I would say for standard shoplifting cases, if you miss an element, you let it go. They will always come back, and you will always have another chance. It covers all the elements of a theft, but only the elements of the criminal act. It does not prove a guilty mind, and that's important to remember. And it can also help support both the report and the conviction, particularly in how you speak to the Gardaí when you arrive, or how you speak to a judge in a court. That's exactly what you're going to do. So that's the end of our ASCONE video. I hope you found it useful. Over the next couple of weeks, I might want to do more, but I'd like to see what you guys want to talk about. If you want me to go on some of the ideas that have come forward so far from various people, if you want me to go on and talk about the follow-up element to this, the arrest procedure, the preparation of the actual arrest, and post-arrest, what you would do with them, I can do that. A reasonable force one if you're interested, one on note-taking and report writing, refusal of entry for door supervisors, or any specific pieces of law or legislation that you would like me to talk about, I'm happy to do. Or if you have other ideas of things that you might want us to talk about, by all means, I would be happy to help. You want to get in touch with us, as always, you can get us on Facebook, Security Operative, Twitter, same thing. Same on Instagram, and on LinkedIn, it's Security Operative Consultancy Services. You can get us on the email here, info@securityoperative.ie, or take a look at the website, www.securityoperative.ie. So I'm going to stop the share there. Again, hope you found it useful. If there's anything else you want me to do, please get in touch. And if you've got any questions or feedback, put them in whatever social media format you're watching this in, and I will get back to you by that day, usually. Thanks for your time, and we will see you on episode 13 next week.